Welcome to Now and Next in Public Affairs, brought to you by EO Intelligence, the home of De Havilland and Dowd Forefront. We are here to discuss the future of the public affairs profession, and today I'm joined by Chris Sherwood, Chief Executive of the NSPCC. Chris, welcome and thank you.
Hey Jack, I'm impressed you're doing this with your jet lag today, but delighted to be here.
I'm also impressed, Chris, so I really appreciate that. Naturally, we are here to talk about the future of the public affairs profession. We're going to get to the future, but before we talk about what that's going to look like, or what, more importantly, you think it's going to look like, it'd be really good to hear from you, Chris, about how the profession's evolved in your time and your experience. When I was doing a bit of research and we were prepping for this episode, your experience is really interesting because you're obviously a chief executive now, and you were chief executive at the RSPCA for over 5 years. You've also been chief executive at Relate. Before all those leadership positions, you started out in Parliament, working in the MP's office. You worked in policy roles. So really, really interested to hear how things have evolved in your time.
When I realised I'd worked around public affairs for quite a long time, I was a trustee of a charity, and some of the public affairs people came to talk to me and we're talking about what Labour would do around welfare to work when they got into power. And I said, well, it will be a priority for this government, just as it was for the New Deal programme back in 1997. And they turned around to me and said, what is the New Deal programme? And by that point, Jack, I realised I'd worked around public affairs for quite a long time. So yeah, it's changed loads. I mean, I started working around kind of Westminster public affairs right back in the end of the 90s. This was before devolution into Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and then obviously regional devolution. When I worked in public affairs, many years ago, we were lobbying and advocating over in Brussels because, much legislation was being made in the European Parliament. So it's been through a sea change. I think one thing that's really happened that I've seen over it is how it's become much more professionalised. I worked in public affairs before it was that kind of much more of an industry. And it was because I was interested in politics and, I'd worked in Westminster. So, you can do the lobbying bit, for the charity. And now, it is a proper profession that people can come into and work their way up as well. But when I was working in this 20 years ago, it wasn't as structured in the same way.
Really interesting, and technology it's definitely something that we'll get to a bit later on in the episode. In terms of how you've evolved in your career, in your journey, I'm really interested to get an idea of how your perception of public affairs has potentially changed over time, from working directly in and around Parliament in a policy role to then becoming a leader of some massive charities. Yeah, you get to talk us through how that may or may not have changed.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jack, actually. I mean, it has changed. I mean, it's always been really important for me, public affairs, because, at heart, I'm a campaigner. The reason why, I did want to be a politician in my 20s, but, I realised that actually working in charities in the voluntary sector, I would be able to have influence to be able to kind of nudge society in a more positive, progressive direction. I'm interested in change. I'm so proud to work for the NSPCC, but I do think that we can have a more fair, inclusive society where, child sexual abuse or child neglect is a thing of the past, not a thing of the future. Working at the RSPCA for nearly 7 years, I wanted to advance the cause for animal welfare. To achieve those changes, you have to engage with the political system. So it's really important for my leadership of an organisation for us to be thinking about how we engage with our politicians, with our policymakers, with senior civil servants, because we're about change, and that's about nudging legislation in a particular direction. What I've learned, though, the more sophisticated, hopefully, that I've got on my practice is the absolute importance of public opinion and being able to bring that people power along with you. And I was really struck about something that happened during the very short Liz Truss government, which was Prime Minister for less time than Cher's song Believe was at number one, I hasten to add. But, the Liz Truss government, something really interesting happened within the environmental sector, which was the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, who have big membership, deployed their membership for the first time. And I remember watching the kind of talk that Ranil Jaywardena, who was then in DEFRA secretary, came out to say that actually, despite the discussion around fracking, actually environment was really important for the Liz Truss government. Then when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he talked about environmental protection as part of his speech on the steps of Downing Street. And that, I think, was responding to people power about public opinion. So the thing that I brought into, my leadership in RSPCA, now here at the NSPCC, is that we need to work together with communities to solve the issue we've been set up to do. It's that people power, that kind of galvanizing public opinion that's really important, because politicians are clearly motivated about listening to their constituents. And that's not the days of trying to get people to send lots and lots of letters to their MPs or change.org and all that kind of stuff. It is about nudging that public opinion and being able to demonstrate that by leaning into that people power. And that goes right back to, I remember that the first time I ever saw that was when Caroline Spelman was DEFRA secretary, and there was a proposal to sell off parts of the National Forest. And that overwhelming, this was back in 2012, and that overwhelming response from the public and the coalition government at the time backed off that because they saw that public opinion. So, it's changed hugely, really important to my leadership of an organisation, because I'm a campaigner and I think I'm a leader of an organisation that's about trying to change society for the better for children. But actually, it is public opinion. It's something that I really love about being able to deploy and lean into.
So many things to unpack there. Thank you, Chris. I don't know whether we've got time even today just to cover all of it. I think the point you make about wanting earlier on in your career in your life to be a politician, and at the same time through experience you've learned that the ability to influence is really significant in the roles that you've done, is something that, just as a general observation, is really interesting to me. I think that where our state is at the moment when it comes to politics more broadly, there's a lack of confidence in the system kind of across the board. And actually, for people to actively make the choice not to go down the elected official route and seek to influence through a different lens and really believe in that and actually do it is really, really interesting for many different reasons.
I mean, Jack, we've got about 10 minutes into the interview and we haven't talked about, just the kind of debating change has completely changed from when I was involved in public affairs. I got involved in public affairs, before Twitter or X or, social media channels. I'm talking back in the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s. And so that new forms of media have just provided an opportunity for politicians to debate with the public, in a ways that didn't exist before. You've also got the kind of shrinking of mainstream press as well. Remember G2 when you can get a nice article about the social issue or Guardian Society, and they've all gone. So, the debating chambers, if I use that term, where we debate with our politicians, that's all changed as well. And there's new forms of media. And you can see it now with, these kind of various, kind of videos that, Robert Jenrick and Chris Philp and others are producing at the moment as well. This is new, angle of almost kind of like politician journalism as well, the kind of civic action that they're doing as well. So it's changed so much in that way. And that's only going to continue with AI, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, where, as kind of discerning members of the public, how we know it is actually our politician who's speaking to us and not some AI bot as well. We've seen that with the Russians trying to put out some of that kind of, kind of content as well to distract public opinion. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops.
Absolutely. Probably keep my comments about some of the politicians and their videos in train stations or whatever to myself.
Just watch the cats in train stations. Nala, I think she's in St Albans station, is a much more interesting thing to watch than politicians at train stations.
Good to know. One of the parts of the conversation I'm really interested in understanding is a bit about how you as a business leader, whether that be in your current role or when you're at the RSPCA or Relate, what's the dynamic been like working with a public affairs function? Because obviously you've come from the background of doing public affairs and have a real strong intellect and passion for it. But as a business leader, you've got so many things to consider. You're considering funding, you're considering people, you're managing deploying huge resources, you're considering AI, you're considering the economy and so on and so forth. You're speaking to trustees. How does that work with a public affairs function, particularly if you're really, really interested in their work?
I feel really, really lucky that I have worked with some incredible public affairs professionals. We both know David Bowles, the head of public affairs at RSPCA. He is an incredible erudite professional, and I'm incredibly grateful that we've got Maria Neofutu and Anna Edmondson, who head up our public affairs and policy teams here at the NSPCC. They're incredible professionals. So I feel really blessed. I hope on a good day that, coming into an organisation, those public affairs teams are actually delighted that I am actually really interested in, politics. I'm really interested in the process of making policy. And it's not so much the kind of the dynamics of policies. I'm interested in how policy happens, how public opinion helps to shape policy. A green paper into a white paper, the mechanics of policy. I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in how you can help to shape policy, to improve it, to make it better for citizens, communities, the environment, nature, etc. So I think the good day is that. The bad days, obviously, is that, I'm going to debate the issues, that come up, and I'm going to have my own opinion, on things as well. But I think that just makes us a more effective organization if we've got that kind of, I'm saying that public affairs is a really important part of what we do as an organization because we're, the NSPCC, we're a campaigning charity. It's our history for 141 years. We've been there at the forefront of advancing child protection and will continue to do so. And a key way to do that is to change legislation. It's also to change attitudes and behaviors. And so public affairs is a really central part of doing that as well. So I think that I bring additional value, interest, commitment around that as well. But of course, I'm going to ask some good questions as well. And I'm going to have some opinions about how we work as an organization.
Really interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall when some of these debates are happening in your offices and online forums. I imagine it's quite fun actually, which is always good. Shifting the topic of the conversation slightly to something you mentioned earlier, AI. Obviously, AI is becoming more and more prominent in everyone's lives in a personal perspective, in a professional perspective. And you outlined the change in media earlier really, really clearly and how in a relatively short space of time, we've gone from newspapers and mainstream media to social media and the debate becoming more widespread. I'm really interested to understand how AI is working for you as a business leader. What are you considering moving forward? And also, do you have a view on how AI is going to impact public affairs?
I mean, it's a very pertinent question we're all debating at the moment. I mean, AI is already here. I think it depends what hat I'm wearing. So as a organizational leader and an organization that is about, changing attitudes, behaviors and laws, the NSPCC through our work in Childline has a really unique window into the lives of children and young people today. And that's a huge amount of insight that we have. And AI is going to be very helpful in us being able to see what is happening in children and people's lives and tell that story, whether that's to politicians, whether that's the media, whether that's to donors and supporters as well, to give that perspective. So being able to utilize our data is going to be incredibly phenomenal. And it's going to sharpen up our campaign messages and particularly, despite what one senior politician said that we don't want to know about experts anymore, it's going to give us that kind of, insight that's really informed by evidence as well. So that's hugely powerful. I think the other thing that's going to be very powerful is being able to kind of engage much broader audiences, be able to have that public engagement on particular issues as well so that you can, extract huge amounts of data. And I can already see how we're embedding AI into our organization now when it comes to testing out some of our campaign messages or how we're going to engage the public. So huge benefits. But for me, as an organization that is about driving social change, we have to also talk about the experiences for children and young people. And AI is going to bring huge benefits to their education, their career, their ability to be able to connect with other people. But it's also going to bring a range of harms. And we can already see that through Childline and through our direct services, some of those negative harms as well. And that is all for things like, child sexual abuse material, which has been generated by AI, awash on social media platforms. Just one example. And the thing for me in our public affairs and campaign messages at the moment is that we've got a very good case study, which is social media, that we waited 20 years to bring about the Online Safety Act to properly regulate social media platforms, despite the overwhelming evidence of the harms of some of those social media platforms, as well as some of the benefits. Don't get me wrong, it's a balanced view. I really hope we don't make the same mistake when it comes to AI, because those harms that we've seen through social media could be turbocharged by AI. And so that's why, regulation of AI, building a regulatory framework while also embedding AI in our economy is going to be critical to learn the lessons from social media. So, it's a kind of double-edged sword, really. For me, it's not so much the AI technology itself, it's how it's deployed and utilized. And we do need to see that regulatory framework be built out alongside the development and embedding of AI in our economy.
Absolutely. Really, really interesting. I really appreciate the balanced perspective you bring as well. When it comes to public affairs, do you have a view on how the profession will need to embrace?
I mean, let's be really clear. AI is not going to replace what I think is really at the heart of public affairs, which is relationships. it is relationships between politicians and organizations, between civil servants. The I remember, I don't think I've ever told this story before, but I remember working on the coalition government, the family test, which was a new test that was, being applied to policy. And I'd done a deal when I was Director of Public Affairs at Relay that we would do a conference for David Cameron when he's Prime Minister, and out of that was his speech, was the family test. Well, I found out afterwards the way he'd said that the family test actually gave it some legal basis to it as well, and opened up government to judicial review, which was through relationships. But also we had to get the family test through some particular politicians, and I won't name them because we're on a podcast, but they were particularly obsessed with marriage at the time. And we wanted a family test that took into account all types of family relationships, not just marriage relationships. And that was all through those relationships. I remember kind of the family test was sent to special advisors on the Friday, and their first meeting was with me on the Monday to go, as the Director of Public Affairs, but we're very satisfied with this family test. It's all those relationships that come out of it. So for me, it's the relationships. But look, I'm waffling now, but coming back to your question, what is critical, for me, that AI is going to produce is that ability to be able to analyze huge amounts of data and be able to draw that evidence base from a broader range of sources. I mean, that's going to be incredibly powerful for us. And I think the other thing is being able to kind of draw on evidence from beyond the UK as well. Again, coming back to what I've seen to be really helpful, in public affairs is being able to draw on case study examples from other jurisdictions as well. The best public affairs professionals in the business are doing that. They're looking at what the Australians have done, what, different states in the US have done, what Latin American countries have done as well, being able to draw on that evidence and insight as well. So, and AI is going to help us to do that much more effectively as well, without having to, commission secondary literature reviews or, commission huge pieces of research, because AI can do that really quickly as well. So I think the other thing it's going to help as well is the practicalities of actually just being able to assess reports and being able to assess huge volumes of data and be able to summarize that, to be able to work out what your position as an organization is going to be on something as well. And that's even more important today because, as we both know, Jack, and I'm sure it'll be part of what Jahavan talks about, is the much more fractured and polarized nature of our politics as well. We've got, a much more fractured political system. Just look at the polls at the moment. And we've also got a level of polarization, which is relatively new, and sadly during my 20-25-year career, that polarization has got bigger and greater in Westminster and in the devolved nations as well, and on more issues as well as we sort of navigate through culture wars. So that being able to navigate that is going to be helpful as well.
Ironically, or maybe that's not the right word, but two of the things you've said are very good segues to some of the questions we've got coming up. So I'll go back slightly. You mentioned in what you were saying previously about the best in business when it comes to public affairs professionals. And you've also talked about how domestic politics is changing here in the UK, as the polls don't lie, ultimately. There's a reason that politicians look at the polls every day, they don't lie. As a business leader, what advice would you give to public affairs professionals in terms of how they can bring additional value to their internal leadership teams over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? In my mind, you've got a changing domestic landscape. I hear from people regularly that say we're under pressure to know all the answers, and we don't, because nobody knows all the answers. I guess, do you have a view on how public affairs is going to position yourself to add more and more value over the coming years?
Oh, I mean, it's that horizon scanning. The being able to look about what the whatever your cause is as a social purpose organization, we're concerned about child protection. What's coming up? What's the changes on the landscape that are going to affect our organization? And, given the kind of the more polarized, fragmented nature of our politics, looking at that from more different scenarios as well. Whether that's tax and regulation, whether that's social policy, I think that kind of horizon scanning and feeding that into an organization so you can anticipate those changes. And I say that because, like many of your listeners as well, leading, organizations through, credit crunch, through, global pandemic, cost of living crisis, the stuff that's coming at as organizations now is just much greater, and the disruptive effects of it as well. War in Europe, war in the Middle East. I mean, it's just a much more challenging environment. So that horizon scanning is going to be really critical to help the organization plan and be able to look ahead as well. And I think the other thing is really and that's for any organization. For charities, for campaigning organizations, I think it's helping organizations to really sharpen up their messages. And for me, that is around, I've already mentioned, drawing on international experience. That's also about really, really understanding that how policy is actually made in kind of Westminster, really getting your policy asks really clarified and sharpened up. And so the civil servants have to engage with it. The other thing is about partnership working as well. I think the really interesting changes that we're seeing in terms of legislation and policy have been as a result of creative, interesting partnerships. I mean, the RSPCA, we were in a kind of real battle with the government and the last government over the first ever piece of agricultural legislation here in the UK since we joined the European Union as the Agriculture Act. That was a partnership between the RSPCA and the National Farmers Union, and Jamie Oliver and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, talking about food and animal welfare standards. Now, that kind of partnership is an interesting, different partnership. So partnership working would be something as well. And I think really about making sure you're drawing on your evidence base as an organisation as well to give you that authority to be able to speak on the issues. So there's lots of different things to be done. But, for me, the most critical thing as a business leader is that horizon scanning and being able to look ahead and anticipate what may or may not happen, because the tectonic plates around our politics are moving at a pace that is very fast compared to recent times.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really fast. Technology is also moving really, really quickly. It feels that business leaders now have got different types of challenges that they may not necessarily have had maybe even 10 years ago. And how that pans out over the next year, the next parliament, the next decade, it's really, really interesting. I think that the horizon scanning is particularly interesting because one would assume that the better you get at horizon scanning, the better you can get at scenario planning, would be my kind of general observation on it. So,
and also because as an organization, you can't just, if you're sat back as a business leader waiting for the kind of normal times and inverted commas to return, well, good luck with that. We are living in the age of disruption. We are living in an age where public opinion is shifting. We are living in an age where, issues that seemed minor, many years ago becoming bigger issues, or issues that were seen as, accepted, actually being contested. I mean, we can see that, in just some of the fringe debates around climate change at the moment as well, which was kind of a settled issue. We need to anticipate a changing climate. I wouldn't say you can necessarily guarantee that's going to be the case in 10 years' time because of the more fragmented and polarized nature of our politics as well. So I do think that scenario planning and being able to anticipate so that you can continue to move forward as an organization, deliver your strategy, deliver against your purpose, against your cause is going to be really important.
A bit of a strange question, or maybe not a strange question, I guess it depends how you view it. In your experience, my observation is that you've worked in organizations where campaigning is pretty much at the heart of what you do, and there's a rich history in that. Have you had any experience where you've worked with, from the lens of being an organizational leader, you've worked with colleagues that may not necessarily have the same buy-in to the value of public affairs or the same interest at all in politics and how it affects you as an organization?
Yes, of course. And how that often plays out is about resource allocation. It's, can be part of that debate around if we put more of the resource into services, then we can help more children, or if we put the resources into services, we can help more animals. And as RSPCA, how I tend to conceptualize that, though, is that, here at the NSPCC, we do three big things. We deliver services, Childline, our direct services, our schools work, which is incredible. We're in most schools across the UK, really important part of what we do. The second is our educational role. We have a huge range of services that we provide to professionals and to the public to help them get it right for children. But the other thing is about changing attitudes, behaviours and laws. And so I think for me, it's about, rather than seeing it as us or them or services versus campaigning and public affairs, is actually saying they're all part of how we advance our vision and our mission. We want to, end abuse and neglect for children here in the UK. It's going to take all of those things to do it. You can't just do it. We can't provide enough services to keep children safe. We do have to change behaviours, attitudes and laws, and it's seeing it in that way. So I think it's about starting with what your purpose as an organisation is, and then how these different tools that you have in your toolbox as an organisation can help you to advance that. And that's been a theme during my time at RSPCA. When I was at Relay, I was there to set up a public affairs and campaigning function for the first time because it hadn't really had that. And, been very fortunate. The previous chief executive then went to the Lords and had really good political connections. But when Baroness Tyler left, a lot of those connections left with her. So I was brought in to really do that, because to really nudge the dial on on kind of healthy relationships, it wasn't just going to be through direct service provision. It had to be through, that changing attitudes, behaviours and laws, because one of the issues there was around people not seeking help, waiting until their relationship was in a crisis before seeking help, not seeing it as a natural thing to do as part of your relationship journey.
I think the relationship thing is a consistent theme that comes up all the time, and it's really interesting to see it from different perspectives. We've spoken to a number of public affairs leaders on this podcast and more broadly, and there will be people who listen to this episode who may not necessarily work in the same kind of environment that is either a campaigning organisation or won't necessarily have the same buy-in to the value of public affairs that maybe you and other colleagues do. I'm really interested to understand, would you have any general advice or good working practices for those public affairs leaders who are in some respects having to consistently demonstrate the value of the work they're doing?
I mean, I think it is that. It is, we're dancing around the world of the word of selling. I mean, in some ways you are selling the benefit of what you bring to an organization. And, there's very direct benefit to the organization, that kind of horizon scanning piece we talked about as well. I mean, we've all just faced the impact of rise in employers' national insurance, which actually public affairs professionals knew was going to happen. We kind of knew before the election that the new government would target independent schools for VAT, and you can see the press being trailed at the moment around there's probably going to be some change around property tax. It's been in the press today as well. So that kind of horizon scanning is going to be important. But the other thing about politics, as we know, is that it's dynamic, and governments will often trail ideas to test public reaction. And, really good public affairs officials will rally and campaign and be able to shift, to get concessions or to be able to reverse a policy or to nudge a policy in a particular direction. So it is that, telling that's what you're doing as well. And the other thing I know that really good public affairs professionals do is that partnership working. I sit on I'm the co-vice chair of NCVO, the main membership body for charities here in England. They do an awful lot of work around advocating on behalf of the sector, and so that partnership working between charities and NCVO is really important to get that work right as well. So yeah, I think it's a lot of what I'm talking about in this podcast is about the ability to be able to change laws, attitudes, and behaviours for my cause that I work with. Here at NSPCC is about child protection. But there are other things for an organisation to be able to do to be able to anticipate what's coming down the line or be able to nudge and shape policy as well. And so, yeah, I suppose I just struggle a bit with the question really, because, I just see it's so obvious to me. So, kind of throwing me a bit back because it's so obvious, whatever the sector you work in, this idea that I don't care about politics is an essential part of our life. It governs so much of our life. So to not have an interest in it, I struggle a bit in those conversations because, legislation impacts our lives in various different ways, so yeah.
In some ways it's like listening to myself in my teenage years having debates with my mates who were not interested in politics, because it is just relevant to everything, literally everything. So yeah, quite reassuring to hear that. My final kind of formal question today is along the same kind of lines. What advice would you share with fellow business leaders that may have an interest in politics but maybe aren't born and bred kind of politics nerds, maybe how we could describe ourselves? What advice would you share with those fellow business leaders?
That's a really good question. I'm sort of slightly still caught in the fact that I am an absolute nerd. My question would be on which constituencies were run by which political party since 1945, but I'll save that for a different day. It's always fun when election, because that's my equivalent of the Super Bowl, really, when I sort of stay up all night and watch election results come in. But I appreciate that I am a unique person in that way, and not all of your listeners will share that love. But look, the advice I give is build that relationship with your public affairs teams. I have a good close working relationship with my public affairs team here at NSPCC. I did previously at RSPCA and Relay, because they're a key part of my team in being able to deliver our strategy, to be able to anticipate what's coming down the line, all the things we talked about in that podcast. So that relationship with them is really important, and it helps me to be a more effective leader as a chief executive, because I'm listening to their advice and building that good working relationship. And it's that working relationship because I'm not just there to kind of tell them what to do, and that doesn't work for me. It's them being able to challenge me and help me to think through what I'm doing as a leader as well. So that relationship is really important to help me to be a more impactful, hopefully more impactful kind of leader of the social purpose organization. So it's that relationship would be my advice. And I think the other thing is that kind of networking, with other leaders as well, to be able to kind of see how other organizations do this would be another bit of advice, and with your trade bodies.
Oh, of course. Good.
public affairs agency like de Havilland or one of your competitors is also very helpful as well. I do like your write-ups after, I've always read your write-ups after budgets or, key fiscal events or, King's Speech or Queen's Speech as it was as well. Joking aside, they have always been really helpful to be able to get the information very quickly on a day when there's lots going on as well, just to kind of pick out the key salient points as well. So I have read them for a long time for that reason. There you go.
Thank you very much. Final question before we move on to some lighter topics. What would be your one non-negotiable for public affairs to remain relevant in the next 2, 3, 5 years?
My non-negotiable. That's a really good question. And I've talked about relationships. I'm going to bank that. The relationships, are going to be critical. I'm going to go a different line. I think it's the continued professionalization of public affairs. I've seen that over the past 20 years. It's not just, I think when I came into it, it was kind of like you were passing on to something. So you became public affairs professional because you wanted to go into kind of policy, and it was easy to go into public affairs and you wanted to really be a policy professional, or you wanted to be an MP, or you were off to do something else. Actually, public affairs is a discipline, and it does have particular skills and capabilities. It has that kind of focus on it. And I think that continued professionalization of public affairs is important. I mean, I can only talk from the charity sector, a little bit in public sector, but that continued professionalization, which I've seen during my career, I think there has to be a kind of a red line non-negotiable as well, because the particular attributes of bringing that relationship building, that really understanding how policy actually works, how decisions are made, how laws are passed. A lot of this is actually quite technical knowledge as well. Understanding whether you're structuring a clause to a bill is a particular technical skill, or what a statutory instrument is, or, how the statutory instrument process works, or how, the importance of getting questions asked in the House or EDMs. There's a lot of technical knowledge there as well as the kind of relationships. So I think that professionalization is key.
Brilliant. Thank you. Couple of lighter questions to finish, which I'm really looking forward to. And we have not briefed Chris on these questions, so I'm looking forward to
Lordy, what are you going to ask me? I'm a cat person, not a dog person.
First question is, what is your favourite party conference story or experience?
Favourite party conference story? Going to Labour conference years ago. I was working there. I've got two. Which one am I going to go for?
We can go with two.
It was Brighton, and I was working for a disability charity. We had a stall, and one of my colleagues was blind, and we went for a walk with his assistant's dog onto Brighton Beach, and there was a couple canoodling on the beach, and his assistant's dog went right up and did the biggest poo you've ever seen right next to their heads. Colleague had no clue what was going on. That was definitely a fun story. And my other one was watching Margaret Hodge at the time tell Stephen Twigg that he should get off the table that he was dancing on at the diversity do because it was rather drunk. And it was quite fun to see. So yeah, that was quite a funny one.
Brilliant. Next question is...
We did clean the poo up, don't worry.
Next question is, who's your favourite Prime Minister?
Who's my favourite Prime Minister? Of which country?
We'll go with the UK.
Who's my favourite Prime Minister? Oh my goodness, that's really thrown me. Oh, I think I'd probably go for Howard Wilson.
Why?
Because he just was an outsider, both in the Labour Party, and brought an outsider perspective into Westminster, broke a few moulds. But I love the vision of the kind of focus on technology and the white heat of technology that he brought to the elections in the 60s. And, it was a pretty progressive government passing, Equal Pay Act, and, a range of progressive legislation. So,
absolutely. And the final question is, who's the best Prime Minister that the UK has never had?
I've read that book, actually. I'm the best Prime Minister that the UK never had. There's a book on it.
Is there? Yeah.
I'm going to go for Barbara Castle.
Okay.
She would have been the Margaret Thatcher of the Labour Party. And when the Brexit debate was happening, I watched her incredible speech, which I recommend anyone to watch, at the Oxford Union. It's her versus Jeremy Thorpe. I have particular views around Brexit. You can probably guess what they are. And her views are different to mine. But watching her incredible speech and how she held the room at the Oxford Union, not her natural stomping ground. She was just an incredible politician. And I loved her diaries. And she would have been a brilliant Prime Minister of the UK.
Really interesting. Thank you, Chris. And thank you very much for joining me. Been really, really good fun. So really appreciate you coming in. My thanks as always to Ollie Foster, who's our in-house producer. Perhaps you have a view on the future of public affairs, or perhaps you're a business leader like Chris and have a view on the future. Please follow the link in the show's bio, and this will direct you to our feedback page for PBO Intelligence, which is the home of Kaplan and Hawthorne.